In today's world, we are increasingly dependent on technology. Our business and personal lives rely on it, but as you've probably noticed, it's unreliable. Our computers are slow, so we end up squinting at smartphones and tablets. The jokers we pay to fix our stuff have no clue what they're doing. We live in constant fear that something's going to happen to our personal data. So we're scared into paying for fake protection that proves useless when disaster strikes. Update attacks, fake Wi-Fi, cloud control, intelligent, successful people feel intimidated by the chaos and think it's somehow their fault. If they only knew what the industry was doing to them, they'd get torches and pitchforks. If only we had someone to explain it all in plain English so we can start protecting ourselves. Oh wait, we do! It's the Computer Exorcist Podcast with your host, Marc Anthony Arena.
From the Wallace Memorial microphone in my home office overlooking the Can of Worms in downtown Rochester, New York, this is the Computer Exorcist Podcast. Marc Anthony Arena here. So glad you have joined me today. And I know it's been slow this month, but I've been doing things and you've been doing things and whatever. So we'll keep churning out the episodes for you. Before we begin, I want to start out by giving a humongous shout out, thank you to Cousin Joey, not only for appearing on the show here a couple weeks back, but also for guiding me through a very harrowing ordeal recently. I went to Massachusetts, gave a speech at the Westfield Athenaeum. Thanks so much for having me. I spoke in their dome. It was wonderful. And then I had the time of my life with my family in Boston. And on the way back, I visited my dad's cousin. And she said, "You take that old car on long road trips?" I said, "Yeah, it's been invincible. It's my 21-year-old Chrysler." And 45 minutes later, I broke down in middle of Massachusetts, and I ended up, long story short, being stranded for 3 days in Massachusetts. And Cousin Joey was there for me on the phone when the 2 times I broke down on the highway, walking me through things and telling me it's going to be all right, and telling me just to shut up and listen to him and tell him what the oil says and tell him what the oil looks like, and so on. So just for being there for me, thanks so much. Also want to give a shout out to Malik and his team. He literally found me on the side of the road and said, "Hey, I'm a mechanic, can I help?" So pretty much saved me when I didn't know what to do. So thanks for being there for me. I wouldn't mind hanging out in Massachusetts in a nice hotel, just writing my book on my laptop, but I had to get home. I had something really important to do, and I had a speaking engagement with a group of important people here, so didn't want to miss that. And eventually I couldn't even find a rental car in the whole region. I called 2 different rental companies. They couldn't find anything in the region. So I ended up renting a U-Haul moving truck, a big moving truck, and just driving home. And so I'm so grateful that U-Haul was there for me as well. And I talked to one of my best buddies on the way home, and he said, "Yeah, I had to do that, and all they had was a 40-footer. So my mom and I had to drive a 40-footer home." So, yeah, luckily I'm comfortable driving big trucks. It was not a problem at all. I said I could totally do this. I was thrilled to drive it home because I could totally handle it. So that's that. Thanks to Cousin Joey. And in my defense, my car was getting older. I shouldn't have taken it on long trips. However, 2 of my best buddies in the weeks before that, had their cars die on them, and one of them was a 6-year-old car, the other one was a 2-year-old car. So my 21-year-old car was much better built and outlasted all of those cars. And it's probably still repairable, honestly, and I might do that. It's just really, even if it costs $1 zillion to repair, it's so worth it because it's an older car without computers and nagging and punishment and beratement and all that. So it's worth any price. At any price, it's worth fixing because it's simple and user-friendly. All right. So I also want to shout out to redact.dev. It's been on my to-do list lately, and they're not paying me to say this, by the way, but it's been on my to-do list to go through and flush all of my zillions and zillions of Facebook posts over the years. I was one of the first members on Facebook back in 2004 when it was only meant for college students. And my first decade or so of using Facebook, I was just on there every day. I would spend hours a day on there just spewing out, who wants to come over and swim? And who wants to come over for a barbecue? And just spewing out stuff. I didn't want to delete my Facebook account entirely. I still use it on occasion, maybe monthly, to keep in touch with college friends around the world and so on. Didn't want to delete the whole thing, but I wanted to prune it and flush all my old posts. I spent a lot of time over the past few years just going through each one. And of course, Facebook is one of these modern websites, so it's extremely bloated and the circle spins and bloats and bloats and bloats. So in order to do that, number one, it's tedious to just read every post to begin with. But number two, you have to sit there and click on each thing and it spins and bloats. And on top of that, Facebook hates you going through your old stuff. So it's going to bloat and then it'll just wipe itself. It'll flush and refresh the page, and you'll have to do everything all over again, or you'll have to dig deeper all over again. You can delete posts, but then sometimes it'll just give up and crash, and you'll have to go dig down to keep going. So that was extremely inefficient, and it was on the bottom of my to-do list. It was something that I've been procrastinating on. So I looked into some tools, and there's one called redact.dev, and it works not only on Windows and Mac, but it'll work on Mint. It works incredibly well on my Mint computer. And they have a free version which flushes a lot of your social media, so Facebook and Reddit. I also have a zillion Reddit direct messages I want to flush without getting rid of my whole account. It'll do other things, presumably Instagram and all those other social media sites. So it'll go through, there's a free version or a paid version, and I paid, I think it was like $60 or $70 for a year to use it, and I said, I'm not going to use it for a year, but actually I am going to use it throughout the year. So it pulls up, you can customize it, right? You can say, look, I want to look at all my posts, I don't necessarily want to flush all of them. You can tell it to flush all of them, but you can tell it I want to look at them and review them first. So, for example, with my Facebook, I said I want to review all of my posts on my own wall that I've done from the beginning of time up until a year ago. I don't mind leaving a year's worth of stuff. So it pulls up all my posts, and it lets me review them. And I can check or uncheck a box that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to leave this. I'm going to flush it. So it took me like a couple years ago when I started doing this manually. It took me a year to go from 2004 to 2011. And this week, it only took me a week to go from 2011 to 2017. So incredible. It just presents everything for you. It doesn't hang and bloat and circle and spin and bloat and hang. It presents everything to you, and then you just check a box that says, all right, here's a month's worth of stuff. I'm going to glance through this real fast. I'll keep one thing that I think is nice. I'll flush everything else. Totally brilliant, totally worth it. Y'all know I'm a cheapskate and I shy away from any paywall or any paid thing. And sure, I wish it was an eternal thing where I could just buy it and have it mine forever. But look, it's not like a video game that I want to keep forever. It's just something for a project I'm doing. I'm only doing this project this year where I'm flushing my stuff. So it's okay to have it for a year. Totally worth the $70. Okay, totally worth it just from a price point, but also because it's going to save me years of time, right? It was the last thing on my to-do list. Like I said, I was not looking forward to doing that. So, and again, it goes along with my whole mission of not feeding the beast, right? If you have Facebook, that's how they make their money, by combing through decades and decades of posts, right? And then it's going to tell, oh, this guy's a liberal, or this guy's a conservative, or this guy's a whatever. And it uses your posts against you. The only thing we can do, laws aren't going to help, right? The only thing we can do is stop feeding the beast. So I'm actually unfeeding the beast so that hopefully it'll dry up and hopefully they'll go out of business. All right. That being said, let's get into some articles. And as y'all know, we're behind on the articles, and I've been printing out articles. And maybe what I'll have to do, I've been trying to get through more articles lately, but what I'll have to do is just not spend an entire episode on one or two articles, right? I gotta brush through them, raise the snowplow, so to speak, and just be more brief with each article. So here we go. And certainly give me some feedback if y'all like the format of the show. If you don't mind my detailed explanations of every article, y'all know I like being thorough. But let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if you're having a good time. Ready? Here we go. ArsTechnica.com, and this one's actually April 2023. There's a new form of keyless car theft that works in under 2 minutes. When a London man discovered the front left side bumper of his Toyota RAV4 was torn off and the headlight partially dismantled, not once but twice, he discovered they were part of a new and sophisticated technique for performing keyless thefts. It just so happened that the owner is a cybersecurity researcher specializing in automobiles. While investigating, he stumbled on a new technique called CAN injection attacks. Alright? So it uses diagnostic trouble codes. The vehicle had recorded many trouble codes. You know when your vehicle blows a code and it said bad injector or that sort of thing? Around the time of the theft, he plugged a computer into his car and looked for all the trouble codes. And around the time of the theft, it was blowing a lot of codes. All right, that's a good hint. The error codes showed that communication had been lost between the CAN bus and the headlight. All right, so CAN bus is controller area network. All right, so CAN injection, controller area network. All right, you have a local area network in your house, okay? You have personal area network, which is your Bluetooth headphones and that sort of thing. And then you have controller area network. It should be car area network, really. And apparently the headlight has an evil computer in it that participates in this network, okay? So controller area network, CAN bus, all the components in a modern car talk to each other throughout the day. And that's why I love old cars, and that's why I really, really should fix that 21-year-old car, because it doesn't have any of this garbage. And as you're going to see, the recurring theme with all of this is ultra complexity breeds security holes, or allows for security holes. It's innate, all right? Ultra complexity means the increased opportunity of security holes. I'm actually going to put that in my next book. Ultra complexity innately means more security holes. Okay, so let's continue. It wasn't particularly surprising considering that crooks had torn off the cables that were connected to the CAN bus. Okay, but more telling was the failure at the same time of many other computer chips, including the front cameras and the hybrid controller. The CAN bus had malfunctioned. He next turned to crime forums on the dark web and YouTube videos discussing how to steal cars. He eventually found ads for what were called emergency start devices. Ostensibly, those devices were designed for owners or locksmiths to use when no key is available, but nothing was preventing their use by anyone else, including thieves. He bought a device advertised that's compatible with Lexus and Toyota, and then he reverse engineered it. All right, look, that's the funny part. The dark web is offering these emergency start devices, but good people need them, okay? It's the opposite, right? Where they're talking about, well, anyone can just buy one. Well, good. How come the good people don't have these, all right? All computers and cars are garbage, and most of the time you're locked out of your own car and you can't start it, right? It's not, unless you live in Rochester, theft isn't a problem. So really, like, good people need to know about this emergency start thing. It helps anyone, good or bad, break into or start a car where you're missing the key. And those stupid keys are $250 or $500 a piece. So I actually should get myself one of these emergency start devices because, yeah, I actually have a legitimate use. When my car computer refuses to work, emergency start device would be nice, right? And again, that's another theme of my upcoming book, is that bad guys have access to all these tools, but the good guys need these tools. Because either one, good and bad guys, are all trying to circumvent evil computers. All right? In the past, thieves found success using a relay attack. These hacks amplify the signal between the car and the keyless entry fob. So actually the original 90s way to do it was you would sit there and eavesdrop on someone walking up to their 90s car. They press the little key fob remote and it goes psh, psh, and then you intercept the transmission from that, and then you can play it back later on. So that was an early one. A relay attack is a little different. It's pretty cool. So what happens is you walk up to the car and you record the signal that the car sends out. With these new evil keyless entry key fobs, it sits there and wastes energy throughout the day, where in order for these things to work, they have to keep yelling throughout the day. All right, so your car will yell out a signal and your key fob yells out a signal, and if they hear each other, then they talk. So a bad guy can easily walk up to the car and amplify the signal that the car is giving off, and then that triggers the key to send off a signal. So the key fob responds, and then the crook will record that and amplify that signal back to the car. All right? So it's proof that all these wireless keys open up a huge security hole. Complexity always opens up a security hole. So the scumbags who designed this system had no self-control and created the system that just spews out signals throughout the day. It's a huge opportunity for bad guys to walk up, right? Let's say you're in your office like 1,000 feet away. So the bad guy amplifies the signal from your car. It reaches your key fob. The bad guy hears your key fob, amplifies that signal from your key fob in your office back to your car, and then the car thinks that your key fob is right there, and your car unlocks and says, cool, you can drive me now. So that's what happened there. And now car owners keep their keys in a metal box, and some car makers now supply keys that go to sleep. Right? Well, actually, that's not true, because I don't do that. None of us do any of that. So again, that's a very stupid way to play whack-a-mole, and no one's doing that besides. All right? So no one's actually defeating that, so anyone can still do that now. And thieves moved to a new way around the security, all right? So the thieves kept going, right? Remember, that's the thing that computer guys don't understand. Bad guys are 10 years ahead of us, right? Computer guys think that bad guys are still doing ancient things. They're not. They're 10 years ahead of whatever we're thinking of, or whatever normal computer guys are thinking of. So the bad guys abandoned that, and they moved on to this new way, where they bypass the entire smart key system, and they do this CAN injection, all right? And you can technically inject this CAN injector into any point, into any evil component of your new car with a CAN bus. But the headlight is just the easiest place to put it in, right? You just break off the headlight and you plug into that terminal, that part of the CAN bus. But yeah, you could plug into any part of the CAN bus. And we're going to explain what happens once you connect to the CAN bus here. So the CAN injection device that the guy bought was disguised as a Bluetooth speaker, right? So if you get pulled over by the cops, they just see a Bluetooth speaker on your dashboard. And so that's really crazy. That's really crazy. And they modified the inside of the Bluetooth speaker to put this CAN injection circuitry in there. And it takes about $10 worth of chips to do it. So the device, what happens is you inject the CAN bus injector device that looks like a Bluetooth speaker. You plug it into the CAN bus anywhere, and then it's designed to impersonate the smart key itself, okay? It's designed to send out a signal that says, hey, I'm the smart key controller receiver unit, and I just received word that the key is nearby, so we can go. Isn't that crazy, right? Like all these new cars, all these new pickup trucks especially, they what do they call that? Compensating, right? These big pickup trucks, they look rough and rugged. But just like the people driving them, they look rough and rugged too, but they're all weaklings inside. These hipsters look like they have man buns and beards and everything, but they're just hipsters. And same thing with the cars. They look all rough and tough and secure, and there's plastic cladding everywhere. But really, you just plug into the wire and you say, hey, you know what? These aren't the Jedi you're looking for, and you go on with your life. So it's still just innately insecure. And so when it first powers on, the injector does nothing. It sits there and waits for the CAN system to say that it's ready. And then it sends out a burst of signals, okay? It out-yells the rest of it, right? It yells louder than the rest of the system, and it keeps sending a burst of messages saying, the smart key is here, the smart key is valid, the smart key is here, the smart key is valid. And it knows that the real smart key controller is still in there, and it would say, no, it's not. So it just keeps yelling and yelling, kind of like the media. When it wants us to believe something, it just yells things out and repeats and repeats and repeats until it eventually believes itself. So that's what's happening here. It yells out a repetitive message and until the car eventually believes it. All right, so it yells so loud that the other circuits, the other evil controller computers can't talk. And it blasts it 20 times per second because the setup is fragile. Yep, fragile. That's all this stuff is fragile garbage. The burst of messages changes slightly, and then it unlocks the doors. You could do that as well. Then they tell it the key's there, then they tell it to unlock the doors, then all they need to do is press the start button and go from there, right? My car is, you have a real physical key, so you also have to do that. But anyway, actually that's not true, because when they stole my car, they were able to bypass all that too. But they actually had to physically break it. In this case, they don't have to physically break the dashboard. They just break the headlight and roll. So, this guy here said they notified Toyota and they haven't heard a response yet. All right, so again, all this ultra complexity and this evil garbage and this convenience is all nothing but a security hole. All right, no one's stealing my 20-year-old and 40-year-old cars. All right, it's too much work for these scammers. They're lazy. All right. I'm going to do one more here before we call it a day. October 2021, CNET.com. Apple has always been the anti-Microsoft. Now Windows 11 is the anti-Apple. Microsoft's upcoming Windows 11 looks to be a solid update to the software that powers most of the world's PCs. The first thing you'll notice is the new streamlined design, similar to smartphones and tablets. Okay, the thing here is, in my opinion, they're trying to make it look like smartphones and tablets because they're trying to make the whole OS into a smartphone or tablet OS, parentheses, an OS that's completely controlled remotely, right? Microsoft Windows used to be a thing that was yours, and you had it on your computer and you used it, and they didn't control you remotely. But little by little, they kept adding remote control features, and now with Windows 10, you had the option of opting out of the Microsoft account control attack. But with Windows 11, they just bully you into signing up for a Microsoft account. That's the only way you can use the machine. And by the way, I can bypass that. So never, ever, ever, if you buy a brand new Windows 11 machine, never let them bully you into signing up for a Microsoft account. You have to do a secret password thing. You have to do a secret procedure, and then you can get away with using the computer alone. Anyway, so that's their goal, is to turn these into tablets, which means remote-controlled products. Okay? And Microsoft added features meant to help people navigate the new ways we've all learned to work during the pandemic, with built-in video chat software and more modern-looking buttons in Windows. Alright, look, Windows 11 is so terrifying that nobody on this planet has ever figured out how to use it. You're not allowed to have a home icon. They actually give you a fake home icon that only shows you the folders that they want you to see. So it's even worse, because now they've ultra-complicated it even further. And not allowed to have a start menu. They have this abomination menu that continues from the tradition of Windows 8 and Windows 10. It's a fake start menu that doesn't allow you to see your programs very easily. You have to dig deep, and it's mainly there for the purpose of showing you advertisements. So I use something called Open Shell, which allows you to have a real start button again. So everyone should install that. All right. Microsoft believes its most important selling point may be what it doesn't do. CEO Satya Nadella said his company is building its technology to work with as many products as possible, including Android-powered smartphones. So I love the fact that it doesn't, of what it doesn't do, because I always say add lightness, right? So in other words, it doesn't try to overreach its bounds and try to be an overachiever, right? So that's a great sentiment. I don't think that they've done that. I think it's still a spewing pile of volcano of garbage. But it's a good sentiment. Now, Satya Nadella is really interesting because he's a realist, right? He sees that Microsoft is a dying organization and everything they do is completely irrelevant. So rather than deny that, rather than be in denial like a lot of companies like AOL and Yahoo and Verizon, he's kind of realistic and he says, okay, look, yeah, we're not the monopoly that we used to be. There are now other abusive monopolies. And so we're going to be a little more open and we're going to work a little bit. They're still tight-fisted, but they're going to work with other stuff. They're going to acknowledge the existence of Android, basically. And he says, today the world needs a more open platform where things that are bigger than Windows can be born. All right? And that's totally cool. And this is really interesting. He pushed this point by inviting Google to bring its Google Play App Store to Windows. That's really interesting, right? Because the Google Play App Store is where you buy your apps, and it's a monopoly, of course, on the on the Android. But you can get other app stores if you try hard, right? And Apple, you're not allowed to do anything on an Apple. You can't do other app stores. You can't do anything. So what he really means is this, right? It's looking like he's just being an open guy, and that's cool. But the real reality is the Microsoft Windows store, their little app store, is an utter failure. I've talked about this many times, how their app store didn't ever do the chicken and egg thing. They didn't do the prime the pump thing. So they have no customers and no developers. No one's making software for the Windows App Store. They tried to force a couple companies, but really whenever you download a program for Windows, you want to go to the original official developer site, the official publisher, and download it directly so that you avoid the Windows App Store. So the vast majority of apps on the Windows App Store are garbage, and he knows it. So that's the real reason why he's inviting Google to put their App Store in Microsoft Windows, so that there's already a community, an ecosystem of publishers and customers. So if he brings that to Windows, then that kind of kickstarts or primes the pump there, so Windows users will have access to all those good apps in the Google App Store, and it'll keep him relevant for a little while longer. In my professional opinion, there is no more need for Microsoft Windows, okay? If you're on Wall Street, or if you have to use specifically QuickBooks, or if you're using certain 3D games, that's the only reason you need Windows, right? So it's a small, maybe 10% of people. The rest of humanity does not need Microsoft Windows anymore. It is completely irrelevant. Okay, I get most of my clients now, at over half, if not 3/4 of my clients, I'm putting them on Mint now, because as Microsoft Windows gets worse and worse and more confusing and more unstable and more hostile with the update attacks, people don't need it. You're okay with Mint, you don't need it, okay? It's irrelevant. The other thing he said is... Microsoft said it would welcome... So that's the real reason. That's my commentary on that App Store. That's why they're doing it, all right? The other thing he said is that Microsoft would welcome Apple FaceTime and other technologies on Windows, right? So Apple ain't going to give up FaceTime. They're not going to... That was their whole thing, right? And I said this before. The reason why Verizon raised to dominance with Verizon Wireless is because they did Verizon to Verizon minutes, right? So you would get your friends onto the platform so that you could all use the Verizon to Verizon minutes. Same thing with Apple FaceTime. That's their killer app, right? The only reason I have an iPhone that I keep as a spare in my house is for the times that I need to talk to someone with FaceTime. So it spreads, right? It's you use this and then make your friends use it so you're all in the same thing, if that makes sense. I wish there was a better term to describe that. But it's, hey, look, I need FaceTime because everyone else has FaceTime. So the only reason I'm buying an Apple is because we all have to have this thing to work together. So Windows doesn't have anything like that, okay? And so he's open to doing that. Again, look, Satya, that's cool, but that would never benefit Apple at all. It would just benefit you, right? So that's cool that you're open to it for sure, but Apple ain't going to give that up. That being said, Apple finally, during the pandemic, Apple finally did kind of sort of open up the FaceTime protocol, sort of, where you can't just pick up your non-Apple phone and start FaceTime calling people, but an Apple user can use an iPhone to send a non-Apple iPhone person a link. and then it pulls open a FaceTime conversation in the web browser. So that's pretty cool. So if you have an iPhone and you want to talk to someone who only has a Windows laptop, you can email them a link and do a FaceTime that way. So with a little bit of restriction, Apple users can now FaceTime non-Apple users, right? You just have to send them the link. Okay. Windows is a driving force for innovation. It's an enduring platform, said Microsoft product chief Panos Panay. And it's home for billions to do their jobs, live their dreams, connect with the people they love. Windows 11 gives you a place that feels like home. It's an area of calm, security, openness, and it's designed to be centered around you. All right, that's a cool sentiment, right? I like that he at least realizes that Windows is where we do our jobs and where we get our stuff done. But it's actually the exact opposite. Most people can't figure out how to connect with anything. It doesn't feel like home unless your home is a hostile war zone. And it's not an area of calm, security, and openness. It's the exact opposite of that. It's chaos and terror and ads flying around, and you got soup flying around, as Dennis Leary would say, and it's just absolute chaos. So, 2 decades ago, Microsoft's attempts to crush competitors led a federal judge to declare it a monopoly. They should declare everything in my industry a monopoly because that's their goal. Microsoft's sharp-elbowed tactics and problem-prone software made it so reviled that people across the tech landscape shorthanded the company as $, right? Instead of MS as the abbreviation, they used to call it $. And again, Satya's doing this because he's a realist. He realizes that the industry has forced his hand. He's no longer a monopoly. They have to play well with others, otherwise they'll sink into more obscurity. Competitors joined in too. Google's marketed itself as "don't be evil." That was their corporate ethos, right? Don't be evil. And they eventually dropped that because too many people accused them recently of being evil. Apple began its Get a Mac campaign, where they had 2 actors. One was a nerdy Microsoft PC, and the other was a really cool, a cool hipster. And that was their Get a Mac campaign. So things have changed. Google dropped the famous "don't be evil" thing, instead saying "do the right thing." And Apple's controlling approach have fueled lawsuits and government investigations, right? Remember, Apple fell to pieces in 2019. They had decided to drop all ethics, and most of the good designers walked out the door. Meanwhile, Nadella has been instituting changes at Microsoft since he was named CEO in 2014. He's pushed Microsoft to soften its approach with partners, competitors, and its own divisions. Again, he had to because they're sinking. So it's funny how Apple and Google, as I've said before, they are now the warlords. They saw the chaotic Microsoft world, and they came in the early 2000s and took it over. So they are now being brutal, and Microsoft is less so because it's kind of funny how Microsoft is trying to improve itself, and they're not. It's a renaissance as much as fixing something that's broken, said Nadella. Now, with Windows 11, Microsoft sees an opportunity to stand out from the crowd. Well, actually, they blew it with Windows 11. And again, Nadella has told developers that Microsoft is more open, easier to develop, and with hundreds of millions of PCs sold still every year, still a platform with opportunity. It's funny because he had to say, like, hey, we're still here, we're still alive so far. And by the way, so even Microsoft's biggest hurdle, which is the lack of a smartphone operating system, right? There's no Microsoft smartphone. Only 7 people bought a Microsoft smartphone. It was actually like a handful, like a couple hundred people or whatever, bought a Microsoft smartphone, so that fell apart. So their biggest hurdle is fading as mobile chips that are powering PCs now starting this year, and the lines are blurring further. Again, they're all trying to make computers into tablets so they can control you more. All right? And I mean that's the encouraging thing here, right? Intel is falling apart this year. They were an abusive monopoly for so long, and then someone came along, ARM came along and beat the pants off of them. And it's so beautiful to watch the arrogant Intel just fall apart. I mean, they made really, really rock-solid computer chips. They really did. But then they came out with a lot of filthy spyware. I'm seeing the horrible effects of the Intel RST scandal, where maybe 5 years ago or so, 5-10 years ago, Intel botched a bunch of motherboards and made this evil fake RAID controller system, which, here we go, now that those computers are starting to break, they're near impossible to fix. So I am just applauding the rapid fall of Intel, and I hope that Microsoft falls in a similarly precipitous manner. All right. In the 90s, when people were first buying their desktops, Microsoft's mission was to put a computer on every desk and in every home, right? A chicken in every pot. By 2015, it had largely succeeded. So what do you do next? Empower every person in every organization on the planet to achieve more. Solidifying it more as a company whose products help other companies' products run. In other words, a platform. Analysts believe that Nadella's broadsides against Apple weren't just about knocking Microsoft's biggest frenemy. His tone wasn't jovial, and he wasn't dismissive like Steve Ballmer when Steve Jobs showed off the iPhone, right? Steve Ballmer was dismissive when the iPhone came out. That's funny. Microsoft's put a lot of effort into Microsoft Office, right, which runs well on iPhones and iPads and Macintosh. But Apple barely updated their iTunes for Windows, and it hasn't even made FaceTime available to download. Well, we talked about that. It is available. And yeah, I'm glad Apple didn't update iTunes, because Apple completely destroyed it with iTunes 12. And this week they're calling it Apple Music Tunes or something on the Mac. And they destroyed it completely, so don't do anything else to it. You're ruining it. It's like when the celebrities get the plastic surgery. It's like, no, you're ruining it. Stop. Microsoft's cool by being uncool veneer. And last night my best buddy was telling me how Microsoft watches all these people on the cutting edge of AI, and then they come back. He claims that Microsoft is kind of behind the scenes, not trying to be cool, but they're trying to improve their AI. So Microsoft Windows is still an ancient pile of garbage, but they are working Microsoft, and they bought Skype and Nokia and completely destroyed both organizations, right? So they bought those Scandinavian organizations and destroyed them. So Microsoft's future, really, aside from cloud rental garbage, they're renting their regurgitated 1991 products. Their future, aside from that, lies in AI and quantum. I really hope they don't botch the quantum, right? And quantum computers are just super, super fast computers, and hopefully they'll just use their money and invest in it, but they'll just let those companies run themselves. All right. I can see why they envy Apple. Everyone bows down to that company like it's a religious talisman, said Roger K. But that's cool, and I always call people addicted to Apple or Apple addicts, right? Apple was superior throughout the 2000s. I was a huge fan. But the people who are addicted to the logo of Apple now aren't aware that they fell apart in 2019. And they'll find out as these newer post-2019 machines break. They'll realize that they're unrepairable. Attacking Apple may not be enough. In 2001, 90% of computers were Windows. Today it's closer to 70%. And that's thanks in tiny part to me, because I am putting Mint on people's computers, right? So Microsoft's influence these days largely extends to the people who already have Windows. And those people will either download the free Windows update when it's released or wait until their company lets them, right? Actually, that's not true. Nobody on earth willingly downloads Windows 11. It's going to be forced onto their machine, or they're going to be scared into buying a new Windows 11 computer. Microsoft's only competing against themselves, said Roger K. No one else cares. Right? And that's it. Like I said, Microsoft is totally irrelevant. You can get away with a Mint machine. So please, when Microsoft tries to scare you into this doomsday date of October 2025, you do not need to buy a new computer. Keep your existing one. It'll run just fine for another 5 years, and then after that, we will mint it. Please warn your friends, do not buy a new Windows 11 computer. It's a massively confusing pile of garbage. You'll never be able to figure out how to use it unless I beat it up. And it creates a massive, incomprehensible amount of waste because people are going to throw these computers away. They're perfectly good computers. Don't throw it away. Thank you so much for joining me today. stay tuned for more articles. We're going to do a lot more of these kind of catch-up episodes. Talk to you next week.
Ah!